as you can read from the title, we will be discussing how good is The Horseman, a lore book for the Wayward Realms game. If you want to read the story by yourself, the story will be in the description. But before we get to answering the question that's in the title, I want to establish how I will be determining how good the story is. In my view, lore books have three guidelines. One, does it tell us something about the world, meaning it gives us information that is in the game world we are playing, or is a part of it. Two, what we are reading will be representative in the game. It will appear in it, meaning that the contents that are presented within the lore book are, whether it be a character, faction, place, or an idea, will be present within the game. Now, both of those first 2 points are related, but the difference is that point 1 is more akin to world building, while point 2 is more akin to actually having that world building being present within the game. And the third point is it a good story? Now, that is fairly subjective, but I normally measure it not on how I personally feel about it, but mostly on how well it accomplishes what it sets out to do. And before we get to the actual points, I want to talk about, I want to summarize the story so we know what it is. So the story stars Elsa, princess betrothed to Darvos, Prince of Splendor, to form an alliance with her kingdom, called Agranor, so that her father can send military aid to Splendor to quell insurgents in the area. But she can't simply go to the capital city, port city of Coventry, because the insurgents have blockaded the city. Elsa is then escorted on a horseback by a horseman called Gon. They travel together until they reach the city. Elsa is afraid of Gon at the start, but over the course of the journey, respects and trusts him due to him define her initial expectations of him. But instead of a brutish warrior, he is a thoughtful and honorable man, and Gon helps her overcome her doubt of being a good leader by sharing his people's philosophy, which she finds very comforting. But their friendship doesn't last long, as they are ambushed multiple times throughout their journey, and the last ambush ends up killing him. She arrives safely at Coventry and vows to stop the insurgents with her people's armies. Inspired by Gon and his sacrifice, she intends to become a good leader to her people. So, point 1. The lore book is the biggest in terms of word count and lore content than any of the prior books. This allows the lore book to pack in more details about the world and to better integrate it within the story. The player gets so much more information on the politics of the world, the religion, philosophy, and factions. To start with the politics, the player gets an understanding at major political players and how that might affect the game. Splendor and Coventry is mentioned throughout most of the lore books, but not a lot of information is given on them. No questions are answered on what they are, what they did, or how powerful they are, or how they came to be. This lore book answers a lot of those questions. Splendor, the nation, is set on the Isle of Coventry, and due to its geography, it is a trading nation. Most of their wealth comes from trade, and from the not-so-subtle name, it is quite wealthy because of it. The wealth seems to allow them to exert influence over the archipelago, resulting in attracting the attention of pirates. The Pirates of Crag Reef are a notable faction that raids their ships, as mentioned from the previous lore book, but also other nations looking to ally themselves with, which we see in the story. Agranor, from what we can interpret from the story, is a powerful nation both in military and wealth. They also seem to worship a different goddess than Arias or Umbria, a goddess called Diala, but that could be just Elsa and her family, or just the main patron of the nation. We don't get much else from Agranor, but we do know that they must be extremely powerful for Splendor to choose them to ally themselves, or implies something else, which is that they're a lot more in close proximity to Agranor than they are with their other allies. And with that proximity allows them to send military aid a lot more quicker, and the situation is really dire because of it. There's a lot to dig in here. With the lore book titled Horseman, it is expected that there would be horsemen. The faction House of Khan are where the Horsemen come from. It is a Mongol-inspired faction. By that I mean it is taking inspiration from the popular conceptions of Mongols. They are horse-riding nomads who value freedom above everything. Gon, the representative of this faction, says as much to Elsa. One of his lines basically says, "A promised land full of vast plains is said we may ride for days on end and never see a single tree." For the context, he is saying that in the real world they believe that there is a land west that is just open plains. From this line we gather that their people place this boundless freedom above everything else. The idea is present in their everyday lives to the extent that they don't name their horses, because to name a horse is to chain it forever to the world. While their people are a popular idea of what the Mongols are, they take more emphasis from the popular philosophy from their people's philosophy than their savagery, which not only makes them feel unique, but also is used very well in the story. They are other houses other than the Khans, and Gon says that most of the people live around the archipelago. And so from that we can gather that we'll encounter a lot of similar factions all across. Maybe they'll be fairly positive or fairly negative interactions, and we'll see when we get into the game. But House Khan specifically is sworn to serve Splendor, and that's why they're not really nomads going wherever they want to. But Gon isn't just the representative for his people, but he also gives information on many other places in the archipelago. The most notable being him and his people being hired by the orcs to quell an uprising in their nation. During that time, he also visited the city of Siad, which he says rivals Coventry as the greatest city in the archipelago. This gives us so much more information about the orcs in the previous book that didn't expand upon it. We knew Siad was something, but it wasn't really clear if it was a city, a nation, a location, or something else. It just, they went to Siad. And again, Kin of Siad didn't really fail to give us anything about the city, not because it failed to give us, but because it wasn't really about it. The Kin of Siad was about a different story, and so Siad wasn't really necessary for that. From what we gather, that the orcs seem to be extremely capable of statecraft and nation building. If they can make a city like Siad and have issues like uprising, that implies that they are similar to other races and not the popular conception of orcs. Religion wasn't a big point in many of the lore books, but we don't really get some confirmation. We do get more confirmation on the gods. Gon, when asked by Elsa who he worships, says he worships all the gods, but that Umbria is their main patron. This tells us that there are many gods in the setting that affect the world. He also says that there are some Eastern forgotten gods. So there are some additional gods on this. So again, a lot of information. Not a lot of crucial information like who they are, what they are, and where they come from, but still a good amount of information. All this definitely makes the world feel deeper. Now, there are still many questions about the gods, but this does give us more to go on than some names. We also get that Gon's people have Umbria as a true patron or matron, which is an interesting, as through the lore books it implies Umbria is a darker reflection or less kind version of Aes, but Gon and his people don't seem to be to embody this darker side. This new side of Umbria, or implied side, makes her and her worshippers have new depth. So as you can see, there's a lot of new lore, both new and recontextualized, but that is all the big stuff. The lore book provides but there are a few small lore bits that are worth mentioning. We see elves in this story that are part of the insurgents. Now, I'm not saying all or most elves are part of this insurgent faction, just that it is interesting that they decided to use an elf character as the only insurgent character Gon and Elsa speak to. Elves in most fantasy settings aren't part of these insurgents or similar groups. The only ones that are part of this are the outliers, but it seems that they are meant to be less like Tolkien elves and more to be similar to humans in that way. Less fair and angelic-like and more just humans, but with like different biological differences. But that is the speculation on just one character. Dwarves also make a mention here as mercenaries for the insurgents, which makes sense given the context of how dwarves operate in this world. And that is pretty much it. Nothing much else to say. Point 2. Now that we know about a lot more about Splendor and Coventry, we also understand that they are in an extremely important faction in the archipelago than what I originally thought. With this information, it is likely that the player will be visiting Splendor and Coventry often. Additionally, we know that what storylines might be in there, like taking down the insurgencies, probably meeting Elsa. You did this a lot in Daggerfall, where you could meet the actual monarchs of specific cities. In Daggerfall's main questline, you did this quite often. Joining factions like House of Khan or the Insurgents, perhaps. We also know a lot about other nations, like Agronor, that the player will likely be able to visit, and the same with the orcs in the city of Siad. The player knows much more than they did before, and what they will actually be able to interact with in the game, and what they will do in terms of quests and storylines. Gods in the setting are real, and there are many of them. Similar to Daggerfall, we may be able to join guilds that worship them, or do quests related to them. Knowing gods exist is also important to know, as it implies a lot on a grander scale. Not much else, but it does provide a good piece of context. Point 3. Horseman sets out to tell the tale of Princess Elsa, who is marrying the Prince of Splendor, not because she wants to, but because she is forced to. The conflict here is Elsa's desire to do what she wants, but is unable to because of her class. The story explores this with her interactions with Gon, who is in his philosophy, values freedom above all, with Elsa thinking that she hasn't been given this chance to be free, leading her to say that Gon is right. The conversation ends there, implying that Elsa should seek freedom of her own rather than be tied down to someone else's chosen path for her, or that we should view her as a tragic character forced in this position. Later she talks about how she will make a terrible queen because of her own handmaiden betrayed her early in the story when she and Gon were going towards Confratry in an unconventional manner. Her maiden essentially told the insurgents where they were. Gon then says to her that she cannot define herself based on her followers, but because what makes a good leader isn't her followers, but how they lead, how a leader leads. Then he says that he has faith in her, and that faith is an important trait to have, because if they didn't have it in their leaders, the Ugandans, I'm terribly misspelling it, they would stray from their path. She has to have faith in herself to continue, because endlessly doubting yourself will do no one good. What this does in terms of the conflict is that it tells us that while Elsa lacks freedom, that she must know that she has the power to ensure other people's freedoms. The Ugdans most likely aren't expected to do anything else but to serve as leaders. They aren't as free as Gon's people, for example, yet they, as Gon or the people they lead, but they are freer because of it. Gon and their people are freer because of their leadership, and without them, they would be lost. This story implies that, again, Elsa, while she is tragic that she is forced down this path, should understand that she can do a lot more good as a leader than as someone who has to just do whatever she wants. She has more power in that way, and that's still valuable. The story ends with her accepting that she can't be free, but can make sure others are. And the story does an incredible job at portraying this. And this is one of the, I think, better lore books overall. I do think that the length of it does definitely help it, because increasing the length increases the ability for the writers to be able to make not only the lore and the story more well written together, but to have a story that can focus on a lot more things than just one aspect of the world or just one story of the world. The first book of the Wayward Realms wasn't bad, but it definitely didn't give us a lot of information. It was a good story about an orc and a goblin, but it wasn't really much else beyond that. But this one does not only tell a good story, but also gives a lot of information about the world overall. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And yeah, this is the second last book, and I do look forward to finishing the series. I will be sort of compiling everything into one video. I will be reworking a lot of the older videos because they are fairly poor, even this one is still poor. But I do want to make it a lot better in the future. And again, if you like this video, thank you for watching. Leave a comment down below if you thought this was nice. And yeah, enjoy.